What would you say is the most important discovery about ancient Egypt ever made? The Rosetta Stone, maybe, which allowed us to decipher hieroglyphs and so unlock the secrets of an entire civilization. They were hoping to find evidence of iron deficiency in his skeleton, because Nubian skeletons from that period had been reported to have unusually high levels of iron. But when they examined his bones, they found something totally unexpected: residues of an antibiotic called tetracycline. And what makes this such a big deal is that tetracycline is only produced by the fungus Streptomyces. The Nubians inhabited the region of Nubia, which lay just south of Egypt along the Nile River. Powerful. Thanks in part to their adoption of Christianity, they conquered much of Nubia and eventually even Egypt. By the end of the 6th century, Kingdom of Axum controlled almost all of the land around the Red Sea. But then something happened, possibly the greatest natural disaster in human history. If they were just using them as foragers, then it could be argued that they didn't know exactly how the plants worked. After all, they were now slaves. There are a couple of possible explanations. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it was probably deliberate, at least in some cases. If the scientists hadn't been looking for iron deficiency, they wouldn't have found the antibiotics. And it's very likely that the Nubians used other plants for other ailments. So who knows what else we might find in their bones, if we look hard enough. This is a big deal because it challenges our understanding of Nubia and its people. Until now, Nubia has been largely ignored by the archaeological community. And that's a shame, because they had a vibrant culture that lasted for thousands of years. I mean, there's no way that Nubian healers didn't know what these plants did. They also had a unique system of writing and a rich mythology, yet somehow they've been forgotten by everyone except the Egyptians. Hopefully this discovery will change things and lead to a renewed interest in Nubia and its people. And if they didn't use them as medicine, it would be a missed opportunity, to say the least. But what's also interesting is that the antibiotic was found in the bones of both men and women, which means that it wasn't just Nubian healers who used it. It was probably used throughout Nubia, by everyone, whenever someone came down with a fever or an infection. And this makes the Nubians the oldest known culture to use antibiotics. The first is that the Nubians simply saw the writing on the wall and realized that resistance was futile. If they cooperated and pretended to be loyal, they might be able to keep their heads. The second explanation is that the Nubians didn't know how serious the situation was. After all, they had been through droughts before, and maybe they thought that once the rains returned, they would go back to normal. Unfortunately for them, the drought lasted for decades, which brings us back to the original question. It seems unlikely, however, considering that Nubia was a matrilineal society where women played a central role in the healing arts. In fact, a lot of what we know about Nubian medicine comes from the writings of Greek and Roman scholars, who were reporting on Nubian practices as late as the 4th century CE. One of these writers was Pliny the Elder, who wrote about the Nubian practice of using plants to induce abortion. Another was the Greek physician Alexander of Tralles, described how Nubian women used herbs to treat infertility and difficult childbirth. The Kingdom of Axum was struck by a devastating drought that lasted for several decades. Food and water became scarce and the people began to die. And when you combine scarcity with desperation, you get migration. Many of the people of Nubia fled north into Egypt, where they either settled down or moved on to the Levant and beyond. Their history stretches back to at least 4000 BC, and they were largely left alone by the Egyptians until the 25th dynasty of Egypt, which was founded by the Nubians themselves. Well, with the Nubians gone, the Kingdom of Axum no longer had anyone to fight, so they were free to conquer the south. One of the kingdoms they conquered was located right next door to the village where tetracyclines are produced. And what's believed to have happened is that the Nubiandish, which we'll call Nubia, traveled with their new Axumite overlords to this village and taught them how to cultivate the plants that produced the antibiotics. Now, this is speculation, obviously, but it's the most logical explanation we have. But that's a story for another time, so it makes sense that they would be the ones to teach the Axumites how to use them, especially since the Nubians weren't really in any position to say no. And this would explain why the antibiotic was only found in the bones of Nubian men and women, because they were the ones who would have been taken to the village and forced to teach the Axumites what they already knew. Nubia flourished for centuries, but during the Kingdom of Kush, as they were known at the time. They fell under the influence of the Kingdom of Aksum in modern-day Ethiopia. And this is where our story gets interesting. And while that fungus is common enough, it's only found in one place on Earth, a small village in the mountains of southern China. Or perhaps it's something like King Tut's tomb, which gave us a rare glimpse into the burial practices of the pharaohs. And sure enough, there was also evidence of another antibiotic, chloramphenicol, also only produced by bacteria found in soil, but soil from sub-Saharan Africa. Specifically, they used two plants, one for each antibiotic. For chloramphenicol, they used the leaves of a plant known as Vernonia amygdalina. This bitter herb is still used today in many different cultures to treat fevers and malaria. And for tetracycline, they used the roots of another plant called Aspilia plucanishi. Today, this plant is used to treat everything from fungal skin infections to gastrointestinal worms. These plants may not have been a deliberate part of Nubian medicine, however. And that leads us to the question, is the use of antibiotics by the Nubians deliberate or accidental? And further testing revealed that both men and women in the archaeological site of the Kerma had absorbed these antibiotics through their bones. So how did the Nubians get them? But what if I told you that it was actually the discovery of tetracycline in the bones of ancient Sudanese people that was the most important discovery of all? You may not have heard about this, because it wasn't exactly covered by the mainstream media. So let me catch you up. In 2014, scientists at the University of California, San Francisco, were studying the remains of a man who had lived in what is today northern Sudan between the years 350 and 700 CE. The researchers decided to run some more tests just to be sure. The answer, according to the study, is that they got them from local plants. And to answer that question, we need to take a look at the time in which they lived. Because at this time, around the 4th century CE, the Kingdom of Aksum was beginning to grow. Now, what does this have to do with antibiotics? If you think about it, the Nubians had been using these plants for hundreds of years before the Kingdom of Aksum showed up. But here's where things get murky. Because we do not know if the Nubians were growing the plants themselves or just using them as foragers. So it seems quite likely that the Nubians did indeed know how these plants worked, which raises the question, why would they have taught the Aksumites how to use them? Was the use of antibiotics by the Nubians deliberate or accidental? And what's amazing about this is that we only discovered it by accident. They built great pyramids and temples and engaged in trade with people all over the known world. Thank you for watching. To keep these videos coming, I depend on members just like you. Join today and help keep this channel growing by subscribing and like the video.